Welcome to the Future in Review Hollywood Forum. My name's Lou Douglas. I'm from Ocean Alliance. Mark asked a couple weeks ago if I would create a panel around Hollywood, and I'm thrilled to introduce these extraordinary guys, amazing panelists, who bring a unique expertise to this venue as it relates to Hollywood. They got a lot to talk about, so I'm going to jump right in. Max Howard. Max is kind of everything animated in the world. Max is the president of Exodus Film Group, which is a unique and independent film financing, development, and film production company. The company develops and produces a wide range of projects in both animation and live action for all media. Max is also a member of the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences. Max formerly was president of Warner Brothers Feature Animation and senior vice president for Disney Feature Animation. During his 12-year stint at Disney, Max was one of the senior architects of the company's animated renaissance. He has collaborated on a couple small films, Little Mermaids, Beauty and the Beast, Aladdin, Pocahontas, Lion King, and Who Framed Roger Rabbit. Max also was executive producer on Spirit Stallion and Other Cimarron for DreamWorks. Eric Starr. Eric is Mr. Gadget, if you will.
Lucky.
Eric is the head of advertising strategy for iPhone at Apple's advertising agency, Media Arts Lab. Media Arts Labs is highly regarded in the ad world and recently just earned the honor of Agency of the Decade. Over the past 6 years, Eric has helped grow Apple from a little computer company into the revolutionary force and cultural icon that it is today. You may have seen some of his work on iPhone with There's an App for That, and his work on iPod for the Dancing Silhouettes. The Silhouettes campaign specifically recently won the outdoor campaign of the decade. Eric was also responsible for the I'm a Mac and I'm a PC campaign, which in addition to the previous one, recently won a campaign of the decade. Rob Hummel. Rob is everything 3D and digital in the world today. Some call him Dr. Format. He's worked at a number of studios in post, VFX, digital cinema, and restoration. Currently, he's working as a cocktail waitress on a bar in Sunset Strip. It's not a pretty picture. Pouring the 3D Kool-Aid that everyone's drinking in Hollywood. Rob is the CEO of Prime Focus Post-Productions in North America and is helping lead their 2D to 3D conversion efforts as evidenced in the feature Clash of the Titans, which was recently re-released. He began his career as director of production services at Technicolor Laboratories, then moved on to Douglas Trumbull's visual effects company during the making of Blade Runner and the post-production work on the Oscar-nominated Tron. A former president of the Dalsa Digital Cinema, Rob has also served as senior vice president of production technologies at Warner Brothers, where he oversaw the digital post-production restoration of Gone with the Wind and another small movie, Wizard of Oz. He previously worked in post-production, animation, Imagineering at Walt Disney Studios, headed animation technology at DreamWorks, and helped launch the digital cinema units at Technicolor and Sony. He currently serves as on the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences Science and Technology Council and the Scientific and Technical Awards Committee. But Rob has hosted several programs of the Academy on film's formats, film technology, and 3D stereoscopic imaging. Roy Salter, Mr. Hammer at the end. Roy is everything in Hollywood as it relates to finance. Roy is the founding principal of the Salter Group. They are a leading independent financial and strategic advisory firm specializing in providing business and intangible asset valuations, financial opinions, strategic analysis, and forecasting. The Salter Group has been the #1 ranked advisor in the world by Thomson's Financials, covering the film entertainment industry, having forecast, valued, provided transaction support in nearly every structured finance transaction involving the major studios and the independent film community. Over the past 7 years, the Salter Group has completed over 900 engagements for values of about $90 billion. And they recently opened a San Francisco office focusing on life sciences. So with that, Maxie, you live in the animated genre. How's the industry changed over the years, and how does Exodus compete on a global basis with these enormously large studios?
Well, I think now because it can. When I started in animation, essentially in the 2D world, we all recognized, or Disney was recognized as the player. And in fact, if any other company attempted to make an animated film, if Disney's name wasn't on it, it didn't do such good business at the box office. With Pixar's introduction of CGI animation, that changed dramatically. Suddenly, there were these wonderful films being made. Disney got into CG on its own, but then really turned it back over to Pixar to do it. But then DreamWorks started making CG pictures. And in that moment, the public stopped identifying animation with one company. So that was one enormous opportunity. A little like live action filmmaking, we don't identify a film with the studio that produces it. If it was Titanic, we wouldn't know whether the film was, if you knew anything about who the distributor was. In America, it was Fox. In the rest of the world, it was Paramount. But the most important thing, we knew the film. So that leveled the playing field, this change in animation of just the public starting to look at animation as just whether it was a good film or not. It's a very, very healthy place for Exodus to come into the picture. But secondly, and more importantly, it's really the price of the technology. There's a price of entry which has changed. When Pixar started, they developed it. They are the father of what we're doing. But the hardware was incredibly expensive, SGIs. Software was proprietary. They wrote it, they created. Well, that has changed. So now, the technology is readily available. So enter Exodus and our plan to compete, to come in and make, well, compete's the wrong word, an opportunity to make animated films. We looked at the model and realized that everybody, anybody who's in the animation space and wants to make films, they build their own studio. And we decided that perhaps we didn't have to do that anymore. 4 parts of making, an animated film, or any film. You've got to start with a great idea. You've got to have that piece. You've got to finance it. You've got to do a distribution deal. You've got to find an outlet for your work, and you've got to produce it. Actually physically make it. And it's the physically making it that we decided to change the model, because we recognized all around the world there are wonderful emerging studios not capable of making an animated film on their own, but that's an expertise that we can bring. We then realized that, of course, we wouldn't be limited by the number of films that we could make each year because we wouldn't have a pipeline. I didn't have to sustain capital outlay, didn't have to upgrade. I could look at a film, sit down with the director, and say, what's the best way of bringing this film to the screen? And that is how live action works, of course. And what we have experienced at the major studios in animation, Pixar and DreamWorks, is that they operate these wonderful, fantastic studios that do produce excellent, excellent films. Second to none. I mean, they are beautiful. But they run the old studio system of the 1920s, 30s, 40s, which is where the talent is permanently employed. And therefore, that makes it a very, very expensive way of doing it. So we have just seen another avenue, not to compete in the same way with them, but an opportunity to make more animated films. There were 500 live action films produced last year. There were just 20 animated films. We see that there's a massive opportunity for us. So I'm sitting before you as the person all about content, and now we think we can bring that content to the screen with a different model.
Thank you. Eric, Mr. Gadget, you've been involved with some extraordinary pieces of hardware. How do you view the delivery of content as it relates to the industry and how it all is changing from your perspective?
Yeah, I just wanted to preface this that I'm no expert in Hollywood or the movie industry, but so when I was preparing for this panel, I was doing a little bit of research, and I came across this article, and it said, if you have a computer and a connection to the internet, you make Hollywood nervous. And I laughed at that, and I just thought to myself, that's just about everybody in this room, and almost everybody in the world. So why are we making Hollywood nervous? And I do want to answer that question, but first I wanted to tell a little story about 2 teenagers. One is Jason. And Jason grew up in the 70s, and he watched a handful of TV shows that he and all of his other friends watched the same shows and talked about them. His favorite radio station was a rock station, and he and all of his friends could sing the same rock songs, the same top 10 rock songs at any given time. And then, it was a summer tradition. He and his friends would all go see the big films over the summer at the movie theater. And then you've got Alex. Alex grew up in the early 2000s, and Alex lives in a totally different world than Jason did. Instead of a TV, Alex has a computer, and he watches TV shows on his computer for free. In fact, he even downloads a weekly Chinese TV game show, which he can follow along because his peers on a BitTorrent site posted all of the subtitles along with the video. If you ask Alex what his favorite radio station is, he would laugh and say, radio's for adults. Instead of listening to radio, he has an iPod, which has about 8,000 songs on it. And they're not all rock songs. They're songs from just about every genre you could imagine, and even genres you guys have never even heard of, and even I've never heard of. If you ask Alex if he likes to go to the movie theater, he says, yeah, he loves to go to the movie theater, but generally only for the bigger films that everybody's raging about. He'd rather wait for it to be released so he can download it and watch it when he wants and where he wants. And the main difference between Alex and Jason is the world Alex lives in, he's never known a world without internet television and without internet movies. He's never known a world without cell phones and computers and constant broadband access. And this whole world of connectivity is what really distinguishes these two boys. And so basically, Alex has this access to a world of unfiltered, limitless content that he can pick and choose from. He can pick and choose to watch, Avatar alongside a prank video on YouTube. He doesn't really distinguish between these big mainstream hits and the more niche underground types of content. And that's a big problem for Hollywood. Hollywood, for decades, had this brilliant machine. It was a locked and loaded formula for creating big blockbusters in a lucrative kind of way. And all of that has changed. And basically now, anybody who has an idea can put it out there on the stage and see if it gains traction. So for the very first time ever, we're living in a world where garage bands and amateur filmmakers, for the very first time, they have an audience. And Hollywood has to share that stage and compete with these people for that audience. And this is a problem for Hollywood because Hollywood, content and distribution used to be an exclusive province of Hollywood. And with the digitization of content and the proliferation of distribution channels like YouTube, Vimeo, Hulu, BitTorrent sites, iTunes, all of that's changed and the power has shifted from the hands of Hollywood into the hands of you and me and anyone who has access to a computer. And it doesn't mean it's over for Hollywood. I'm sure almost everybody in this room saw Avatar. But at the same time, almost everyone in this room has seen some amazing piece of content that most of the rest of us have never seen. So this old model, which works so great at bringing one movie to millions of people, it doesn't work the opposite way, where it doesn't bring millions of movies to one person each. But that's what the internet does so well. So this is the new world we live in. And I'd love to say I knew a solution. I really have absolutely no idea. But I think we've seen this once before. And if we rewind about 6 years, back when the music industry was in chaos, fans were stealing music off illegal file sharing sites, record companies were suing 12-year-olds, and artists weren't getting paid. Emotions were high, music sales were down, and nobody really knew what to do with digital music. And the music industry just was up in arms. They said, what do we do with digital music? And what everybody had lost sight of is what brought everybody together in the first place, which was the love of music itself. And while the music world was bickering, moralizing, and stealing, somebody came up with a solution, an elegant solution that was simple and easy to buy, manage, and enjoy your content. And yes, that's iTunes, and yes, I work for Apple. No, I'm not suggesting iTunes is a solution for Hollywood's concerns right now, because I don't think it is. But I think we can learn a few things from iTunes' success. I really think that everybody needs a simple and elegant way to buy, manage, and enjoy content. Whatever content you want, whenever you want it, wherever you want it, on whatever device you want to do it on. And Hollywood knows this, and Hollywood's working really hard at trying to figure this out. It's a very complicated thing to figure out. But until everybody embraces the fact that behaviors have changed and we need to change our model for leveraging these behaviors, it's going to be a long time before anyone sees success in this area. So I do really believe that it is possible for content and consumers and creators, both professional and amateurs, to coexist on the same stage, because we have no other option.
Thanks, Eric. Dr. Format. Talk to the audience about the 3D movement in general. 2D to 3D, is it difficult? What are the technologies involved? And then something that we spoke about a couple weeks ago, which I think everybody would be most fascinated about, is you're talking about a problem the size, I think you used the word tsunami coming, as far as digital storage goes and how much we don't understand about it.
I think what Eric was talking about was much more fascinating, but the 3D thing, I was fortunate. I worked on a film called Captain EO, a theme park film, so I got an early introduction to 3D, and then I was involved with Muppet Vision 3D, the last film directed by Jim Henson, and then I was, while working at Walt Disney Imagineering, I redesigned their 70mm 3D rig for the shooting of a film called Honey, I Shrunk the Audience, which up until recently, for some reason, Disney saw an opportunity to bring back Captain EO at the theme parks. I have no idea why, but that's now playing. Captain EO is now playing again at Disneyland. Not that Disney would look for a financial opportunity to jump onto there. So I'm supposedly an expert on 3D. I've written an article in American Cinematographer magazine, the next American Cinematographer manual for cinematographers around the planet. I've written the chapter explaining about 3D. So and one thing that really is bizarre is, as everyone, I was at a conference for a very well-known proponent of 3D. He's chairman of an animation studio last October. I went into this conference and he said, I can't believe more people don't shoot films in 3D because when I go to the Grand Canyon, I see it in 3D, which is really quaint because he doesn't. Your 3D stereoscopic depth perception ends at around 20 feet or so. Beyond that, it's monocular. And in fact, in stereoscopic movies, in fact, we have this thing we call the edge of the screen, we call the proscenium arch. You have to be careful if an object is coming off the screen a little bit. You don't want it to be occluded by the proscenium arch. And why is that? It's because your monocular depth perception in your brain overrules stereoscopic. It knows that if an object is occluded by the edge of the screen, it can't possibly be coming off the screen. So your brain, and this actually will happen in a 3D movie, your brain pushes it back to the screen plane. Because your brain's not an idiot, it's been, by the age of 2, your stereoscopic depth perception is pretty much hardwired in. So what I find interesting about this frenzy, and because we're short on time and I want Roy to get a chance to talk, is 3D is not 3D. The proper term is stereoscopic illusion. I appreciated the earlier panels that have mentioned 3D, about we're all going to say there. Here's a key thing to remember. In real life, you converge and you focus. If I look at this glass here, I'm converging and I focus on it there. I'm getting 3D stereoscopic perception on the little monitor there. I'm converging, I'm focusing there. I look at Eric here, I converge and I focus on him. What happens when you go see a 3D movie? You remain focused at infinity and you change your convergence. And your focus is fixed. You never do that in real life. In fact, when I gave my talk at the Academy, I had everyone lift up their thumbs. I'll ask you all to do this. And focus on your thumbs about 18 inches in front of your face. Now I want you to remain converged there, but now focus on me. Remain converged on your thumb, but now focus on me. I can help you out. You won't be able to do it. It's impossible. But once you put glasses on and send 2 separate 2D images to your eyes, that's exactly what happens. So let's be clear, 3D is not 3D. And I know, as he said, I'm working for a company right now. I resigned myself to pour the Kool-Aid for everyone that's drinking it in Hollywood right now. It'll be interesting if it becomes this all-pervasive because we are not seeing reality. It is stereoscopic illusion. Real life does not look like that. When you see New York City, you don't really have a stereoscopic depth view of the Empire State Building versus the Chrysler Building. But when you see a 3D movie, I promise you that is exactly what you'll see because they'll exaggerate the interocular to enhance that because 3D... Now, Jim Cameron did a spectacular job of using it as an enhancement to his story. But even then, there was parts where you saw that big tree and you were seeing depth views on, I'm sorry, you just wouldn't see that in real life. So I'm just offering that as a devil's advocate. Everyone that thinks we're all going to be watching everything with glasses in the future, at some point, I just wonder if there's a novelty spike that might wear off here. Because in the 1890s, you couldn't go into a Victorian parlor that did not have a stereopticon, and they were gone by the 1920s. And now on eBay right now, we could go online with your iPad probably, and that is really, could I borrow that by the way? And you could find stereopticon slides because there's so many tens of thousands of them made. And I think we should hand it off. The tsunami I was talking to Roy about was the storing of digital data. In Hollywood, we store massive amounts of data. 4K digital frames are around 50 megabytes per frame. You know, when you have 14 to 40 frames per minute, we've had this film medium, this kind of cute film medium that if we record it out to black and white separations, we can put it on a shelf in a chilled environment, and it's good for a century. In spite of all the things you've heard about of film decaying, we actually know how to do it right now. But now this company called Eastman Kodak is kind of just destroying themselves and going out of business. So everyone's storing things on digital, and the solution is migration. And that just doesn't quite work. We need to find a digital archival technology. I'm working on something myself on the side, but something where we can actually put it on the shelf and know we can come back to it 50, 60 years from now and know that it'll still be there. Because right now the migration solution is like painting the Golden Gate Bridge, except before you finish painting the bridge, it's time to start painting it again, and the bridge is getting longer. And so when you have this much digital data, we're creating not just the movie industry, but geophysical, medical, government, the records. I was with the librarian, Billington, the Librarian of Congress, Library of Congress 2 days ago. And this is when you have 140 million assets that's growing by 14,000 assets a day. Imagine that. That's coming in per day. And they want to digitize it so everybody has access to it, but their fear is they're in this migration nightmare. And I'll stop there.
Thank you. Roy, you have the distinct pleasure of having a look at almost every structured deal in Hollywood. Would you share with us your thoughts on the industry and how it's changing? And specifically for Mark, I don't know if he's here, but I remember last year at Del Coronado, Mark was up at the podium, Mark Anderson, and said, you invest in film finance, you will lose money. So I'd love for you to also address that to Mark.
Yeah, how about the futures market that's going to start?
I don't know Mark Anderson, so it's hard for me to say. Where's it going? In the last 6 years, up until really the end of '08, there was about somewhere in the neighborhood about $15 billion that was committed through Wall Street or Wall Street style deals into filmed entertainment activity. And that tended to be some of the larger stuff. There's a lot of mid and smaller stuff, Exodus being one, and a number of others. There's a lot of drivers to outcome. I think Max spoke of them, but just if nothing more to accentuate, the fact that somebody comes to any of you with a good story, a good script, a good cast, a good idea, what have you, I get a lot of calls from people around the world, and it seems as though that, for most people, would be the driving influence why they would want to invest or lend into a film. And it's not to say that those aren't important, but the bigger strengths that drive positive outcome, maybe unfortunately, are the ability to get it from that point to us as a consumer. Most of the major studios have an ability to create real throughput of garbage if they choose to put it to us. They have the ability to promote it in a fashion that looks and feels pretty damn good. They have agreements with television broadcasters around the world, and now even with electronic delivery companies that are growing, that almost manufacture by design profit. And it's a very interesting phenomenon. During the times of capital excess, you see more films going through distributors, and during periods of, if you will, capital deficiency or weakness, you see less. Right now there's a little more than 200 or so films going out. A couple of years ago it was as many as 600 through the studio system into the US. When there's a lot of films going out, the studios call themselves distributors. When there's a lot fewer going out, the studios call themselves producers. And they do so because as an investor in something of which there's few, they make a lot more, as opposed to an investor in an infrastructure where there's many going through it, they make more doing that. Right now, we're looking at an environment of fewer. We're looking at a capital-constrained environment. A lot of that having to do with, frankly, the meltdown globally of cap markets, and not as much to do with the underlying performance of film slates. If you were to compare, and we have the data on film slates, I would tell you that as compared to just about any other asset class, perhaps except energy, the film slate performance structures have performed at or well in excess of almost any other asset class. You can include rail transport, any type of transportation, certainly real estate, just about any other measure, they're performing better. There's two structures that are perhaps the most distinct. I shouldn't say them by name. One of them is a model that we developed on a whiteboard out of my head, which was to co-invest in a specific type of genre within a specific budget with a specific studio. With that idea, $750 million was raised. That money has been invested, and to this point in time is generating over about a 5-year period well in excess of a 30% IRR. Absolute cash cow. There's no debt left, there's cash in the bank, and they are funding name brand films. I can't say their name, but you would be astounded how successful they are. I would tell you that that's the greatest story in the industry, but it's not. There's another one that's co-financed a full studios slate. Happens to be that studio is exceedingly well managed. They do a great job of hitting doubles and triples and some singles, and that happens to be an organization that co-invested and owns in excess of 40% of Avatar. This was, if you will, a private fund that owns in excess of 40% of Avatar. Before Avatar, they were already generating in excess of a 20% IRR. Post-Avatar, it's probably in excess of 40%, and they are still doing exceedingly well. The structures of these deals tend to be the most important aspect for people to focus in on, because it's not so much in your power to cause someone like Max to or to not make something, or a studio to or to not make something. It's only in your power to try to design bells and whistles within the construct so that you get what you really want, and that you design it in such a way that you almost ring fence or put ceilings and floors, if you will, collars on behavior, and you compel behavior down a certain path, at least as it affects you. And there's every ability to be able to design this. Going forward, it's more complicated. I see that we're over time.
We all right on time, Mark? We keep going a little bit here?
Going forward, it's more complicated for all the reasons that have been covered here. Electronic delivery has definitely made it more complicated to forecast outcome that used to be, even 2-3 years ago, still able to be forecasted. Film of a certain type, like a house, could be expected to generate a certain amount of money at the box office if one were to know that a major studio is going to release it with a certain amount of money behind it in advertising on a certain number of screens. You could do a plus or minus within a range. And from that, because of all of the other ways the industry works, if the studio is going to release it with an assertive manner and their interests are aligned with yours, you can expect a certain amount in video, you can expect almost a contractual amount relative to box office and pay TV, and almost a contractual amount relative to box office and free TV worldwide. So it's almost like mathematics, which we do a lot of this stuff. You don't have to be a rocket scientist, and we're not rocket scientists. Going forward, as compared to looking back and designing deal structures and investing or co-investing alongside of studios, you're dealing with this very dynamic moment in time. I've been doing this since 1981. I've been forecasting since 1981. We've been involved in almost every deal since 1981. And I have to admit that this is a moment in time where, on the subject of where it will go, there's an inability even for the studios to know exactly, because there are forces at play that they can't control. Studios cannot control Apple, notwithstanding that Jobs is part of a studio now. The studios cannot control Netflix. The studios cannot control, even though they own it, Hulu. The studios cannot control Vudu. They can't control a lot of things. So consumers and technology and the interplay between them are driving the growth and the evolution of these businesses that the studios are trying to figure out how to position themselves within the context of, so that they can do deal structures. That translates back to the investor. And so the investor has to try to guess where all this is going and what its implications are on the things that you used to be able to forecast versus going forward. And that's where the situation exists at the moment in time. It's fascinating.
Thanks, Roy. Thank you. I know we're over on time, but any questions just before we go to lunch for the guys here? Please.
Hi. Peter Coronius from Australia. Very heartening to hear that the movie industry is still successful, and I think being almost in Hollywood here ourselves, encouraging to hear that the model is still effective in terms of audience participation. In Australia, we've had an unfortunate situation where an internet service provider was sued last year by actually a member of our association, 34 Hollywood studios. How do you see the future going forward in terms of countering illegal file sharing? And where is the innovation likely to come from? We don't see a big future in suing internet service providers, but where do you see the innovation that's actually going to meet the moving market here?
Roy?
Well, the innovation's coming, frankly, out of people's houses and garages. You know that. I'm not sure that this is your question, because we do a lot of work in Australia, as New Zealand and now even Singapore and Hong Kong, with all the trade agreements going on between these different places. I think that the greater challenge, and I was talking to someone before this panel with the BBC about this, but I think the greater challenge is to try to, and I'm not even sure where the challenge would be focused, but let's just say from the studio's point of view and the consumer's point of view, those two. Consumer wants everything for nothing. And I said this earlier, well, if that's the case and consumer groups step forward and have their success, they'll somehow succeed, I don't know how it would happen, in getting everything for nothing, compelling profit-generating organizations to cause things to be teed up for nothing. If that happens, then frankly, a lot fewer things will be made. They won't be very interesting, and they'll be put out there, and you'll get nothing for nothing. The stratification between that and an avatar, which is at the opposite end of the world, is one that suggests that somebody who's going to be involved with putting up money on avatar, if any of you, all of you, if we were to put a deal in front of you right now, and there will be an avatar too, and it's going to be successful, would you invest in it if it cost as much as Avatar 1? And it had a deal structure that looked like Avatar 1. Would you do it? Intuitively, you'd say, yeah. I mean, this thing's generating a massive return, multiples of its investment. Somebody would say, of course they would. Well, what if you juxtapose that alongside of consumer groups who would say, but it's going to go straight from the theater to a digital cloud, and any one of you, as an investor, is now able as a consumer to be the buyer of that once, and you pay $5. And you can watch it anytime, anywhere, however you want to watch it, and it, under those circumstances, would have a very little likelihood of generating a profit, at least statistically, at least at this moment in time. It's the job of the studio, and they get beat up pretty hard for this, to somehow navigate between now and some uncertain future time frame to manage that profitability, not just for themselves, but strangely for the thousands of people who work on that movie, and the probably thousands of businesses that employ those people, and the thousands of businesses beyond that, and governments associated, including Australia and New Zealand, who benefit from that film through the Weta Group, okay, to somehow bestow upon that person who has a fiduciary responsibility to his shareholders a greater fiduciary responsibility to somehow maintain some sort of an equilibrium of profitability so as to continue to cause that to be made in an environment where, as you said, innovation and technology is enabling greater and greater access for free. The truth is that Avatar is available right now on the internet. Any one of you can get it. It's been filmed inside a theater, and there's about a half a dozen sites that make it available. They're all pirated. And they should be shut down. It's simply wrong that they're allowed to exist. But they do exist. And there are some countries that don't dissuade it. And they're wrong. And is it wrong for the studios, as fiduciaries of their shareholders, the public at large, and all the companies that support them, to do everything they can to shut it down, including lawsuits? My feeling is they absolutely should. And my feeling on that is that anybody that would impose upon them simply wants nothing for nothing. And anybody that says anything different is just full of whatever. That's my view of it.
Just real quick, just to say, this take 30 seconds.
Sorry.
It's like when I was at Warner Brothers, one of the reasons for wanting to extend copyright was because if they're going to restore Adventures of Robin Hood from 1939, they don't want to not have copyright on it, because they don't want to spend the money and then have somebody else just copy it and give it away for free. And the case can be made that there's many classic titles that have fallen out of copyright that would be totally worthwhile to restore. But since a studio, by restoring, does not own the film, these films just sit there fallowing, decaying on the shelf because they can't, no one owns it. But only complimenting what you're saying, it's wrong for these people. If you can't make money at it, no one's going to be able to make an Avatar.
It just seems that these organizations are villainized for being the world police. And it's an unfortunate byproduct of the role that they're getting paid extremely well to play. A lot of news articles about how well media executives get paid. Look, I mean, if all that they do is get paid for being the world police for the benefit of those who work on these things and benefit from them, then they're worth it. That's my feeling about that.
Thank you very much.